All right, everyone. It is Thursday. Yes, another Thursday. If you've lost track on your calendar, it is another episode of the MSP Initiative. Today, we have a special guest, actually. We're just coming off of the Channel Strong Tour 2.0. We're able to get back out safely on the road and kind of see people in their element, in their backyards. Today, we have a special guest from the tour. We have the CEO of Netgain Technologies, based out of Kentucky, and Mr. Tim Burke. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing fine. Thanks so much for having me, George.
Absolutely. So, why don't why don't you take a moment? Why don't you give everybody a little bit of your background, right? How did you get into the IT industry? How did you get from, you walked out into the wild and now you're the CEO, right? So there's got to be a story in between that sandwich, and I'm sure people would love to hear that.
Yeah, I think I'm probably a bit unique as far as the IT industry goes, in that I'm an outsider for sure. I actually got exposure to the opportunity to be the CEO of Netgain via the private equity fund that invested in Netgain at the end of 2018. So Evergreen Services Group is their name, and they own a portfolio of largely managed service providers. And I got to know folks at Evergreen, and they told me what an interesting and unique business it was. And so that's how I got involved. And I've been here in the seat for about a year and some change now. So it's been drinking from a fire hose ever since I started. Before I came to work at Netgain, I was at Bank of America, working in their credit card line of business. Prior to that, I worked at a private tech company called Red Ventures, down in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then before that, I actually spent 2 years teaching in low-income schools through Teach for America.
Interesting. So that is a very, very, very unique path into IT MSP land. So why don't I have questions on that. We're going to circle back to that, but let's actually go with who is Netgain, where are you based, how many customers, employees, just give us a little bit of a roadmap on how things are going at your company.
Yeah, so Netgain was actually founded in the mid 80s to be a value-added reseller, as an Intercom and Valcom franchise. So the early history of the business was really around reselling hardware. And then once we rebranded as Netgain Technologies in the 90s, the owners at the time saw the writing on the wall and saw that they could be adding a lot more value to their clients if they developed a managed services offering. So they did that in the early 2000s. And ever since then, we've been growing both organically and inorganically. Acquisitions have been a feature of Netgain over time. And so right now we've got about 150 employees. We've got over 200 managed services clients. We're one of the larger, if not the largest, I think, managed service provider in the Midwest and Southeast. And just recently, this past year, expanded down into North Carolina via acquisition of a company down there called Progressive Computer Systems.
Okay, so is there a particular vertical that Netgain concentrates on, or is it kind of just all over the map, or is there something that you're planning on concentrating on moving forward in terms of verticalization?
Yeah, we have been focused pretty much throughout the history on a couple of different verticals. Number one is financial services. We have really good relationships with banking clients. We are SOC 2 Type 2 certified, have developed our own MSP offering, and so we've seen our security practice continue to grow. So financial services, healthcare, and then because of the nature of the market in Kentucky, we have a good deal of manufacturing because there's a lot of Toyota manufacturing that occurs in the state. So we have a lot of clients who are manufacturers. So those, I would say, are our biggest verticals, but definitely financial services and healthcare are our forte.
Very intriguing. So from so a couple of things I take away from that one. So MSSP, right? It's a very fluid term these days. I feel like a lot of people call themselves that and may not understand the full, you know, concept of what that ultimately should mean.
Sure.
So from an MSSP standpoint, what is Netgain actually offering? I'm sure it's a combination of third-party solutions tied in with your people, but big picture, what's the pitch there?
Yeah. So our North Carolina branch has a very interesting and unique offering because they are so healthcare focused around HIPAA compliance. So their
Mhm.
offering is really to try and put the systems and frameworks in place such that you can be HIPAA compliant in the event that you were to undergo audit, and making sure that you're using all the appropriate data security and privacy practices that you would need to. On our core business, really, there's obviously the watching the hen house dynamic that can exist if you're the MSP and the MSSP. So we have a separate division inside of the company led by a gentleman named Scott Logan internally, who is a CISSP. And what he offers is virtual chief security officer services. So a certain
Mhm.
engagement where Scott is very well versed in NIST compliance and is delivering NIST compliance framework recommendations to our client base. There's the social awareness, a lot of the stuff that I'm sure people are familiar with Know Before. We've got vulnerability scanning and pen testing, um, and I'm trying to SOC as a service through a partner of ours, Arctic Wolf. So that is really the offering that we package in the marketplace, and we try and make sure that it's cordoned off, very well cordoned off from our core managed services offering.
No, fair. So when you're out in the world and you're trying to prospect, new customers,
Sure.
is it pitched all as one big story, or do you start with a layered approach, or is MSSP now the focal point in the in the front door, the first thing you talk about? Just trying to get a feel there.
Yeah, we've seen that actually they can complement one another and they can exist separately. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we thought was really interesting as we were developing our security offering is that the addressable market in our mind was larger, because while there are inevitably going to be people who have their own internal IT teams or who are going to be running their managed services in-house, we felt like that was less likely for someone to have their own CISSP internally or to have their own CISO internally. And so we often go out and prospect completely separate from our normal managed services offering when we're pitching security. And a lot of our marketing is geared to discuss those concepts discreetly. But obviously, within our own existing customer base where we've built a lot of trust, and we tell them, hey, you do managed services with us, here's this interesting offering that we think is the right thing for you. We've seen good success that way as well. So it's a bit of a cross sell and pure prospecting story.
Very no, this is good. This is good information because people are still trying to figure this out in many cases. So
Sure.
from a managed services standpoint, I assume that even if they don't have the MSSP stuff, you're
Mhm.
still security focused in whatever the delivery is for those people.
We are, and really the value proposition is just the additional time and attention and caring and feeding, and really a lot of the deliverables that come along with that offering. But it is oftentimes very accretive to the conversation when we say, hey, we're doing a lot of these things, or we're recommending you doing a lot of these things. This offering will be willing to come in and pull the levers for you versus just giving the recommendations.
Got it. No, it makes sense. So because of those two worlds, I assume you're running into some level of co-managed IT, right? Where the customer may be large enough that there's still an in-house resource or two or three,
Hmm.
and then you're augmenting, that team with stuff that they either don't have the bandwidth for, or they just aren't up on the newest stuff, or whatever it may be. Is that starting to become, with the pandemic times, which we're about to get into, is that really starting to bubble up in the conversations, or has that always been the case? Like, I'm just trying to get a feel.
Yeah, we've tried to be, I think we've always sort of felt like partnership is a better way of framing what we do than replacement. And so
Hmm.
we've always tried to discuss our services as a partnership. There are certain clients inevitably where we're doing everything and operate almost as if we are their internal IT team. But that being said, we also have a healthy number of our clients who have very solid pre-existing teams that we work really closely with. I don't think there's been a discernible difference, at least in my mind, between pre-COVID and post-COVID on that dimension. It's mostly just always been the way that our conversations have been structured is just tell us what you have today, and we will tell you how we think we can add value inside of that structure.
No, fair enough. I mean, if you've always been practicing it, right? I feel like co-managed IT was really popular, like in that early 2010s, right? And then like everybody tried to go very far off to rip and replace. I want to do it all. And now like things kind of are leaning back, right? Where like you kind of have to go in with the multiple things to pitch and figure out which way is the right way kind of thing. But
Yeah, and yes, I was just going to say for it to be successful, I mean, what we have seen are two things. Number one, it's great to have a local resource inside the network who can help you out, has some of that institutional knowledge, maybe has the perspective of the ownership group or executive leadership team in a way that you do not. But then secondly, when we see it really work well is when we've got very clear expectations that have been set on the front end around who manages what are the situations where we're taking point, what are the situations where you're taking point, and things of that nature.
no, it's good. I mean, listen, clear responsibilities, not just from a contractual standpoint, but just from a day-to-day functional standpoint are absolutely necessary to coexist and not step on toes either, right? So, and just responsibility of who's doing what. So that's good. So from a COVID standpoint, right? Because that seems to be, I would really love for us to be in front of this and this thing to be completely closed up. We're not quite there yet, clearly. So, talk to us about how your journey as Netgain has gone, from the beginning and up until now, right? How did that affect the way that you're delivering operations? What were the main, kind of pain points that bubbled up from your customers? How has your staff been able to, or maybe not to, work remotely? Just give us an idea of what that looked like.
Sure. Um, well, first of all, I just want to say I give our team a ton of credit for how flexible they've been over the course of the past 6, 7 months now. Um, we decided at the very first or second week of March to to send everyone home to begin working remotely, and it was just an incredibly seamless process. So the leadership team, the management team was incredibly prepared for how to be able to execute on that, particularly given the fact that we had a centralized network operations center that had 45 people in it. So trying to get that to go remote almost overnight was a challenge, but
Work,
it
yeah.
has gone very well. Um, with regard to our clients, it's really interesting because the clients where we have real deep strategic partnership and where we have been selling them on the competitive advantages that come with technology, and they have been viewing technology as a competitive enabler versus a cost center, when it hit, they went home, no issue. They had VPNs set up, they had multi-factor authentication, they had all the appropriate infrastructure that was in place to be able to send their folks home and be able to work remotely in a very scalable way. And so that was an awesome reinforcement in our mind of the work that we had been doing with those clients over many years to get them ready for that type of situation. And you're never preparing for that situation exactly, but you're just preparing for a flexible network. And the inverse was also true. Places where we felt like we were, fighting tooth and nail to get somebody to upgrade their end of life server because they didn't want to, I don't know, invest in their technology. They had a more challenging time. So it was a mixed bag for us. But I just think the entire team on our side deserves a ton of credit for everything that they did to help our clients work remotely. From a business standpoint, we've been really pleased with what we've seen. We've been able to grow pretty meaningfully this year on the managed services side. Um, I think in large part due to a lot of what our marketing team has been doing and putting out thoughtful and useful content, delivering good service to the individuals who we do have inside of our book of business. Our business is unique in that we started as a VAR, and so hardware sales have always been a big chunk of our revenue mix. So that when COVID hit March, April, that side of our business was diminished once the budgets were cut there. But the recurring revenue side of the business was really, really strong. So it was a bit of a tale of two sides. We've now seen our non-recurring revenue really come back up, and the managed services come back, or non-managed services come back to life. But I just consider myself very fortunate to be where we are today, given how challenging of a situation the past year has been for many, many businesses. So I consider us very lucky.
So from a forecasting standpoint, do you feel Netgain by the time that December 31st, 11:59 p.m. are you going to be on par, a little bit underneath of where you originally expected? For obvious, if it is obvious reasons, nobody could plan for a pandemic, or are you going to be ahead? Like, how do you think you'll end up?
So we budgeted and we are going to continue to set around 15% growth targets year over year. The overall MSP market is, I think, growing in the low double digits, if not high single digits every year. So we try and set targets that are a little bit more aggressive than what the market is doing. At the end of this year, I think our business will end up growing around 10%, is where we are right now. So we're a little bit short of where we initially projected, but I think unequivocal success, and the team deserves a ton of credit for getting us to be able to weather the storm the way we did. I mean, we sort of took a pretty firm punch in March and April and have just been clawing our way back ever since. And it's been a testament to the hard work of all the individuals inside the company, and the
No,
resilience of our clients.
that's good. So from we had literally on Tuesday, our last session, we had a CRO on, right, from one of the vendors in the MSP space, and
Sure.
he talked to us about how he went back to his sales team and like in March immediately reset projections and quotas and like had to like bring things to a reasonable point where people could still get somewhere, right? Is that something that occurred for Netgain from a account management standpoint or from a net new business standpoint? Like, did you have to reset the conversation with your inside people?
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredibly useful exercise for us to just be able to know what we needed to do from a liquidity management standpoint, right? When things hit in March and April, we did not know what we were going to end up with from a non-recurring revenue standpoint. So we went back and our sales folks were saying we would be lucky to get to 70-75% of what we forecast initially at the beginning of the year. Luckily, we have seen things rebound much more quickly than that expectation, and I think that was due in large part to a lot of the stimulus that has been provided to small and medium businesses. We saw that between the CARES Act and the PPP loans, it served as a really nice way for our clients to be able to invest in ways that they maybe otherwise would not have.
I agree. So because you're set up in multiple different metros, right? And
Yep.
that's part of your strategy, right? Your growth strategy. Has there been any fluctuation in the way that you've addressed things from one, territory versus another, or have all pretty much been around the same across the board?
Yeah, it's been pretty similar, honestly, across markets. And I would say that the market that is probably the most unique and newest to us is Chapel Hill, or our North Carolina office. And it was amazing how similar our stories ended up being, despite the fact that we operated fairly differently prior to the acquisition, and even now are still taking the integration steps slowly but surely. So it feels as if it was systemic. What has occurred to our business has been systemic and cross market, and not sort of idiosyncratic to one market versus another.
No, that's well, I mean, standardization's key. Well, that's a good thing to know.
Sure.
Um, so looking at onto 2021, what's the feel, right? Are you guys, you know, optimistic about what you're seeing? Have you forecasted accordingly, or are you still on the more conservative side because, of the finality of all of this, right? Still not here yet.
Yeah, I would say cautiously optimistic for sure. The the part of our growth strategy where I think we're getting a lot of traction toward the end of this year is on the acquisition side of our strategy. And so we have really started to see some seller behavior pick up and people being more willing to engage in conversations about selling their businesses than we had during obviously March, April, May, June. So I'm really optimistic about the inorganic growth that we are going to be able to see in 2021. On the organic side, I mean, it's really hard to predict. We have a rich pipeline that we're ending with Q4. I think we're building an even bigger and better pipeline for Q1 of 2021. But I think there are a lot of business owners and businesses that are still really treading lightly because I think people aren't sure whether or not there's going to be a long tail to the economy, the economic effects that are occurring with COVID. So I think, it's sort of like the recession behind the corner. We don't know whether or not that is going to eventually occur if there's no additional stimulus or depending upon the outcome of the election. I just think there's a lot of uncertainty. So I just don't know. I personally don't know whether or not what we're seeing right now will persist into 2021.
Okay. So, since you came from the VC side kind of thing, and, it's nice to be able to ask certain questions, if nothing other than for people who are sitting on both sides of that aisle can really gain some visibility, right? So
Sure.
number one, a cool new term that popped up out of nowhere that I've learned, Ebitda. Have you
Yeah.
heard of this? Is it real? Is this a math you're doing?
you know, I actually, so yeah, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and coronavirus. But yeah, no, I think that the amazing part about a lot of the businesses that we've been looking at is how they weathered that storm. And so the Ebitda, if you're a seller of your business and you're coming to us and having conversations, it's likely because you believe that you did phenomenally well during March, April, May, June, such that the value of your business is greater now than it was then. Recession resistance is obviously incredibly important to any type of business. So I think a lot of businesses that we're engaging with are trying to show us that their EBITDA is actually higher than probably it was before. So that's been interesting. But I think yes, definitely they're across all asset valuations and a lot of the private markets that's in play right now. You're seeing people having to make adjustments based upon what occurred post COVID.
Fair enough. COVID aside, right? When you're, there's a lot of people who hear that, M&A is really been ramping up over the last, let's call it 3 years in the MSP space. Although when you look at the total number of MSPs versus the total number of acquisitions, you might be talking low single digits when it's all said and done.
Sure.
But with all that being said, like many have said, if you run your business, like if you're planning to eventually sell it, you'll be happy no matter what. That, with that being said, like, what are the main key things that either dramatically increase, the sale value of a business or dramatically decrease, right? Like, I feel like there's blocking and tackling stuff, but then there's obvious things that no matter how you handle it, it's got to make a dent either up or down.
Yeah. I mean, we use a pretty basic criteria when we're looking at a business. Number one is what percentage of their revenue is predictable and recurring. So that's huge. If you can get your business into the 60, 70, 80+% recurring revenue, not only does your life become a heck of a lot easier because you're not having to worry about the month-to-month changes in product sales, but it's a much easier and more predictable stream of cash flow to be able to forecast into the future. So that's a big one. The second one is, of that recurring revenue, are their clients staying and retaining over the life of their contracts, or do they have potential churn issues and retention issues and client sat issues? So not only that your revenue mix is recurring, but that those in your recurring revenue mix are well taken care of and well supported. Third is just the general gross margin profile. How are you doing in terms of being able to service your clients profitably? That's huge. And then the only other remaining things are sort of G&A, SG&A, and so and ultimately the EBITDA margin. So those are a lot of the things that we look at. With increasing scale comes increasing valuation. So the bigger the better. If all else being equal on all those other dimensions. just as a quick rough reference.
So how real it like you have when you look at MSPs, a lot of them are owner led, especially the smaller ones. They started out of the trunk or their basement or their garage and slowly built themselves up over 5, 8, 10 years, whatever it is.
Yep.
But a lot of these MSPs have customers that stay with them for years, right? They've just been there forever. How does it really affect the numbers when you got guys who are doing termed agreements versus not, right? Like the 3, the 2, the 5. Does that really make a difference for you when you're evaluating the valuation of a company?
It's interesting because some of my peers that I work with, we would probably be debating this right now, because the question we always ask is, what keeps a customer? Does value keep a customer, or does a contract keep a customer? And I think people are of two minds about it. Certainly it is a nice insurance policy when buying a business to know that of the 100 clients that they have, 85% of them just renewed their 3-year agreement. It just gives you nice predictability into the cash flow and customer retention of that business. But that does not mean or say that a business that's built on shorter term agreements is not a valuable one, or a business that has shorter term agreements can't keep those customers for many, many years. So I think really it's all about risk. Deal processes inevitably are just about risk and risk mitigation. And certainly there is a greater risk to a business that you're purchasing, no matter how good your diligence is, that has little to no contract in place for recourse in the event that a lot of their clients became dissatisfied with the change of ownership or service delivery changes or human capital changes, whatever it might be. So that may bake itself out in the price. But those long-term agreements oftentimes are a nice insurance and security blanket.
No, that's good to know. I mean, people, so what about the reality of, let's say you have a company who has all of their customers under some sort of agreement, and they have a escalator built into the agreement, right? To not just adjust for cost of living and cost of business and just that general stuff, but just generally, right? Hey, I don't want to come and have to renegotiate this with you. I'd rather just have this conversation now up front and know that technology will eventually cost more over time, versus somebody who locks in the price for a set period of time and then has to go and renegotiate that at the end of that term.
Yeah, I mean, escalators are huge. Certainly, the trends in our market, which I see, are that competition is driving a downward compression on price, and low labor unemployment and increasing demand for technical talent is driving an upward movement on cost of labor. And so that's an equation for worse profitability. So if you have an escalator clause and you're able to mitigate some of that with the ability to say, hey, guess what? Our service is getting more valuable, which I think inevitably it is as technology gets more complex, but B, getting more expensive. And we need to be able to appropriately price that so that we can go out and get great talent. That's a nice thing to have when you're looking at a business.
No, it's good to know. So let's go the other side, right?
Yeah.
You acquire a business, like deal's done. You're in the middle of trying to figure out how to start, kind of intermixing the story. How long does that process take? And how likely is it, from a retention standpoint, that you retain more than 90% of the customers coming over?
Yeah. So that's a huge goal of mine anytime we do a deal. If you think about particularly asset-based purchases, the assets of an MSP are its people, its clients, and its competitive advantages inside of the marketplace. And so my huge priority, number one, and there's a really good book by Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, called Made in America. And his whole point is the key to Walmart's value creation long-term was taking care of their people. And by taking care of their people took care of the customer. And so that's sort of what I try and do when we do an acquisition. Is I try and make sure that the individuals at the acquired company know that life is not going to be exactly the same, but it is my goal to make sure that you are continuing to be satisfied and want to show up to work for the reasons that you wanted to work for the prior company. So that's a huge focus of mine. The timeline itself can be anywhere from 12 to 24 months for integration, and really I think that you potentially do more damage than you do good by fitting a square peg into a round hole from an integration standpoint. The brass tacks of the matter is North Carolina has a great thing going. They have a very, very unique and good service delivery offering. They have a very good leadership team in place. They have awesome employees. They have awesome clients. So from my standpoint, who am I to come in and want to tinker too much with that? I bought a great, we partnered with a great business. So I should let that business continue to grow and then find places on the margin where we can add value. And that's really been my approach so far.
No, it's great visibility. So when it comes to now that you've been acquiring businesses, how many acquisitions has Netgain done since you've been involved?
Well, since I've been involved, we've done one, and we've got a couple of other ones that are potentially going to close by the end of the year, although I can't disclose too much about those. But we have a couple of interesting opportunities right now. But Netgain historically has done, I guess now, kind of 5 acquisitions or more.
Okay. How do you begin or handle or matriculate through the process of deciding what vendors to keep as acquisitions happening? Merging those vendor relationships into one conversation rather than individual bubbles,
Right.
and generally just negotiating price based now on increased volume, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge, and it's almost like a religious debate anytime we're having a conversation with someone who uses a technology that is different than our own. Because, for instance, I mean, you can sort of pick your poison, but let's just say ConnectWise versus ServiceNow.
Mm-hmm.
Those two players make it intentionally very, I'll just say, exhaustive to get onto their platform, and also incredibly painstaking to get off of it. That is sort of the stickiness of their business model. And so, again, I think the key that I think about is I bought it, we purchase an asset. That asset's delivering value with a certain series of tools. If I think that there's a greater probability we will destroy value by having their team come from their tool set to our tool set than there is we will create value in the form of cost synergies, then that's the kind of math that I'm doing in the background. Luckily, so far in my experience, our tool overlap has been pretty good with the acquisitions that we've done, which is always nice. It's one of the first questions I know I ask is, what accounting software are you on and what PSA do you use?
So clearly ConnectWise, what's the accounting software?
We use Great Plains.
Okay. Good to know. Microsoft product guys.
Yep.
So I assume that, just out of, just if anything for academic purposes, like between your, UTM, your backup, I'm sure there's Microsoft 365 everywhere. Like what are the building blocks to the majority, like not asking for anything proprietary, but like there's a trend right out in MSP land on the vendor stack, right? Is there anything that's unusual, out of place, or are you generally dealing with mostly kind of mainstream people out there?
Yeah, we're pretty down the fairway, frankly, and I think the reason we're down the fairway is because usually that stuff works well and delivers pretty good value for our customers. One interesting product that we've been leveraging is a company called iLand. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all.
I'm not personally. Go ahead. Who's iLand?
Yeah, but and frankly, I'm not a technologist at all, so I will probably bastardize any attempt at even explaining what I'm talking about right now. But iLand is an additional backup solution for like Microsoft 365 or Veeam and things of that nature. and we've seen some pretty great results with the clients who've been using iLand. So I know our engineers are pretty supportive of it. But outside of that, we're pretty boilerplate in terms of the premier vendors that we work closely with.
Got it. Is there, so as a guy that's largely come from outside of this circle, right? You kind of,
Yeah,
came from the other direction, right? Nothing wrong with that, but different perspective, right? Like usually the people sitting in your chair started in the mailroom,
sure.
or on the front line doing password resets and like worked your way up. What has been your experience in trying to A, learn the business, and then B, take the business background that you have and like mesh it with the reality that you're in the technology business?
It's a challenge for sure. I mean, I find that very frequently that I'm having to tell employees to take it to the "Are you smarter than a fifth grader" version in order for me to understand things. So I don't have any of the institutional knowledge that comes along with having been through all these different technology cycles, which can be a good thing. But more often than not, I find I'm consistently trying to flatten my learning curve and learn things that way. Um, I think at the end of the day, you know, I don't think you have to have built a Tesla to be Elon Musk. I don't think that you have to necessarily, build Salesforce to be able to be Mark Benioff. So I think that in many cases it can be helpful. And I certainly wish I try and get myself into the mud and into the nitty gritty as much as I can to really truly understand the lives of our employees and empathize with them. But I don't think it has been an inhibitor to my ability to get up to speed.
No, it's good to know. So let's go the other way, right? Hey, I sold my MSP. I'm now in this period where I'm helping that transition happening, or maybe I've been, maybe I'm not the guy at the very, very top. Maybe I was like a lieutenant that then got like rolled into the larger organization. Now I have a new role. Like, what changes once the guys who are watching the dollars and cents are outside investment guys rather than employee owned or self-owned companies? There has to be a different vibe and different requirements that now are sitting there. What does that look like?
Yeah, I wish that Lisa Mitchell, who is our general manager of our North Carolina office, were here, because she would give you a much better perspective than I would. But the financial reporting and analysis standards are just higher when you're reporting up to a group of shareholders than they are when you're, reporting into yourself effectively. And so that's probably one of the bigger changes, is just, hey, we need our financials closed by X day in any given month. We need to be able to provide pretty reasonable explanations for why certain things occur inside of the P&L on any given time frame. I personally have to spend a decent chunk of my time reporting up into our shareholders what I have seen and am planning to see inside of the business. So I would say that's probably the primary one. As far as just running the business, I think that you hit the nail on the head earlier, which is that we try and partner with businesses who are already running themselves in a very disciplined manner, and who have a pretty good pulse on things like their gross margin profile, the W-2 multiple of their service labor, how the amount of dollars that they're spending on SG&A, per dollar of MRR. The majority of the peer groups that exist in the MSP landscape encourage that behavior. So we're not really having to teach anyone how to mind their P's and Q's when they think about the P&L. The actual sort of post-close go forward management plan is really up to the seller. If the seller wants to maintain their spot, Lisa is a member of our executive leadership team. She's going to help drive Netgain to be what it's going to be 5 years from now. And she gets to continue to run her business almost as if it's her own, while taking some chips off the table from a financial standpoint. So to me, that's a really compelling value prop for a seller of the business. Is like, hey, guess what? You want to ride off into the sunset? Be my guest. We'll try and continue your legacy. You want to stick around and run your business and capture some of the equity value, great. That sounds good too. Our goals are just going to be probably a little bit more aggressive than the goals were when it was just your business. And some of the requirements that we have are a little bit more, I'll say, strict or advanced. So yeah, that's my overarching philosophy when it comes to management and the changes that managers experience.
So which brings a good question then, right? Because those two scenarios are diametrically opposite of each other, right? Like
They
I'm
are
riding off the sunset, I'm done, here are the keys, I'm out. To hey, I want to be around, I got a strategy, I got a plan, let me show you the way. How does that how do you approach that in the deal structure, right? Like it's got to be different.
totally very different. So when we're going through a deal, if I know that person is not going to be has no ongoing desire to be with the business, you better believe I'm checking all of our all dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's for every contract, for every customer relationship, for every employee, for all everything you hear in a diligence process. If you believe that the seller's not going to be around once the wire transfer clears, you got to be really, really sure of that you're getting what you're getting. In the inverse scenario, when the person has an ongoing vested interest in the business, I think it doesn't mean you slack on diligence at all, but I think it does give you a little bit more faith that that person is going to want what is best for the overarching two parties long term. And obviously there are exceptions to every rule, and these are generalizations, but that's just the general feeling. And then yeah, I think that the other thing that is obviously interesting is people may believe they want to be a part of their business during the deal process, but you would be amazed at how quickly someone's tone can change once a wire transfer hits their bank account. So we plan for the scenario that even if someone says that they want to continue on in their business running it, we still plan for the scenario that their mind may change.
No, I mean, listen, I can totally understand the other reality of hey, you've been working for yourself for so long, now you got to report to somebody, right? So there's a
Right.
definite psychological component to that. Hopefully, people don't flip the script 30 days after getting the wire transfer as easily, because I assume that again, the upfront money's going to be different, the earn out money is going to be different, the whatever equity they're going to get in now the new larger entity's got to be, if at all, it's going to be different, right? So like their decision on what they do post sales got to be a part of the larger conversation, right?
Yeah, very, very typically we are having a lot of those conversations on the front end. I think anytime we start a sale process or acquisition process, one of my first conversations with the seller of the business is, what does good look like for you? Does good look like you can work 20 hours a week in the business doing some of the things you like doing, but you get to offload the other 20 hours of the week? Does good look like you're completely mastering the ship, but you get a little bit more take home ashtray money and you get to do whatever you need to do? And so you there's a range of outcomes that are attractive to people when they're thinking about selling their business. And far be it from me to tell them what good looks like. I try and hear what good looks like from them and tailor our approach through the process to that.
No, it's good. It's good advice. So everybody, it's not just about the P&L. It's what your feeling is moving forward, right? So
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah, there's there is this idea, and maybe you can correct me because you're sitting in that seat, not me. But there is this idea that when acquisitions happen, the buying party likely wants the owner to really go away. It sounds like from what you've said, you're open to either, right? It all depends on how deep these guys want to go when you're in that discussion.
Right. I hate to keep hitting this point, but it's just, what do I think is going to create long term value? And in the event of our North Carolina acquisition, the reality of the situation is no one can add long term value like Lisa can within that business. And if we can create, if we can enhance her value creation opportunities by taking some of the things that she used to have to do off of her plate, a lot of the back office functions, a lot of the HR and recruiting, having to do direct selling, and we can plug in our institutional sales mechanism, that's going to allow her to create a ton of value over the long term. And so that's not always true, right? When certain bunches of assets or certain groups, if I'm having a conversation with the seller and they decide that they have absolutely no interest in running the business, then it would be value destructive to keep them in the seat.
Fair.
And so that's the lens I try and view it in. And like anything, George, you're wrong plenty of times and you learn from your mistakes, but that's been the general approach we've tried to take.
No, that's good. So from last question on integration. So I guess this again largely will change based on if the person running the ship is still around. But from an evaluation of the personnel, right? Because as you said earlier, what is the assets of an IT services organization? People is right at the top of the list, right? And their capabilities and their capacity. Depending on scenarios, how do you determine whether everybody stays, some people go? Is there a redundancy overlap situation happening? Like, there are centralized services that you just mentioned that, whether it's accounting or recruitment, HR, right? Like some of these are just services that, regardless of how many people and how many locations are kind of centralized, right?
Yeah.
So how does that process look like?
Yeah. So first off, I think we try and give the entity about 6 to 12 months running with, there's only a certain amount of understanding you can get of the human capital of any organization from a deal process. Because fact is, many sellers don't want you talking to their individuals until very late in the process. And B, it's a cagey back and forth. So you're not really nobody's showing their cards fully during the process. So we try and really do a deep evaluation of the human capital inside of the business after the transaction has occurred. And in the event that there are, let's just call it redundant, I hate using the word redundant because we're talking about people here, but let's just say that there's duplicative functions that can be handled at headquarters. My first question always is this an A player who we would want to be in the business for the long term? And if the answer to that question is yes, I work with my VP of HR incredibly hard to find a home for that person. Because as any MSP owner and operator will tell you, there's more than enough work to go around. So if we can find something for someone who's really talented and skilled, if we can repurpose that individual into a place where they can continue to add value in the group entity, that is always our preference, relative to saying, okay, well, now we automatically need to change the cost structure of the business to capture all the synergies. And secondly, I'll just say that because we focus on profit margin and margin profile, gross margin profile in most of our deals, we find that we would be completely comfortable living with their cost structure the way it is. Right? We're not underwriting deals with a ton of cost synergies baked in. We're trying to buy good assets that we could leave alone and they could grow on their own for to 10 to 15% a year for the next 3 years with the same cost structure that they have. So it's just a bit of a different way that we have yet. And then basically from that point, any cost synergies are upside. That's how we try and think about the underwriting of our deals.
I'll tell you what, the way that you're approaching things sound a little bit different from other guys out there with money men, but I'm just gonna be honest.
Yeah.
Which is great to hear, by the way, right? Because like it creates this nervousness tick, right, for everyone because of what's happened elsewhere, right? People talk. It's a small world when it's all said and done. But this approach is, kind of like, hey, listen, why break a good thing? If you figured out how to make money, keep making money. Don't let us get in your way. Wherever we can help, we'll help. I mean, that's kind of a refreshing approach to things, I think.
Yeah, and like I think it's almost disingenuous for me to be the one who's telling the story. I think Lisa Mitchell would absolutely tell you, I would believe, that we have kept our promises to her and to their business, and we have tried to run the business in the way that we said we were going to run it. at the end of the day, George, I benefit much more long term from an MSP owner wanting to sell their business to me
Mhm.
versus having to convince an MSP owner that I'm not going to do the things that they may have heard that I do, right? I want to create net promoters in the people that I partner with.
I agree. No, that's fantastic news.
Yeah.
So moving forward, right? If you were to give people in the MSP driver's seat, whether they're in your position where they're in acquisition mode, or whether they're in the opposite position, Lisa's position, which is, hey, I built my business up and I'm trying to just, provide some value out there from a technology standpoint. What does the next 24 to 36 months look like? Right? What changes do you see in the industry that, would you would tell people, hey, pay attention to this, if any?
Yeah. Um, well, I can tell you what I hope happens, I hope happens, and then I can tell you what some of what we're seeing. Um, I think that we're looking and hoping to be a managed service provider that truly does own the entirety of the technology stack. Uh, we're seeing unified communications as a service increase. We're seeing sort of backup and DR as a service increase. We're seeing infrastructure as a service increase, cybersecurity as a service increase. And so, I want to be able to go to a new prospect and tell them, you will literally never have to worry about anything that occurs inside of your technology stack because Netgain is managing all of that for you. That would be my ultimate long-term goal. In terms of what we are seeing, I mean, we're seeing a ton of competition in the landscape, and I don't think that's going to change. I think we are seeing a lot of consolidation. The amount of private equity and just strategic transactions that are occurring are meaningful. Ton of private equity money is flowing in on the software provider space, so I think that has really meaningful implications as Toma Brava and many of the other
This
people come.
and yeah, a bunch of the other
Yeah.
guys.
So
Sure, yeah.
there are certain things that occur just naturally when that happens in terms of pricing and some of the service delivery changes. So that's what we're seeing. But at the end of the day, I think that managed service providers, as more and more people go to the cloud and are using infrastructure as a service, are going to have to learn to adapt their business model to the changing architectures that they're managing. And it's not that all the problems go away, it's just that they're different. And so we want to try and be ahead of what those different problems are and be thought leaders for our clients on whatever is the best solution for them.
No, that's fair. So when you add these new technologies that are coming in, all this new cloud stuff, SaaS stuff, you know, and you go to your like, how does that like when you go to your existing customer who's already under agreement, who already has a bunch of services from you, and you're starting to layer new services on for them, how does that conversation go? Right? I mean, because at some point there's only, I guess depending on the eye of the buyer, right? There's so much money to go around, right?
Yeah. The argument we find to be compelling is the one throat to choke argument. Who we will be your centralized hub. We're the ones who are going to be on the hook for anything that goes bump in the night, and you'll have a centralized point of contact. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that some of the client conversations we have are death by 1,000 technology spending bills, right? And so it's about trying to continually improve our offering so that we can make the value very clear. The analogy that I use about managed service providers is sort of like a long snapper in football. Nobody knows who the long snapper is until they botch a snap. And I
Mhm.
think that the same is true in our business, right? If we do our job phenomenally well, the only time we're heard from is when we send the bill. So it's all about continuing to add value and demonstrate that value to our client base. And if and when we do that, that's when we see the knock-on conversations go really smoothly.
No, it's good to know. How I mean, you have a security offering, but like ransomware, breaches, data privacy notification laws, compliances. How much is this part of things that you worry about, right? As you're running the business.
All the time. I mean, every every time my shareholders and I get together, we have a monthly call, and every time they ask what's keeping you up at night, and my answer really hasn't changed over the past really all of 2020. It's cybersecurity for ourselves and for our clients. It's about staffing appropriately and making sure we're not running too lean and delivering good value to our customers. And then now it's about weathering the future storm that may or may not be coming in the form of the economic outcomes from COVID. So I think about it all the time. And I think that it's incumbent upon all of us to be thinking about it, because the individuals on the other side of the table are certainly thinking about it, and they're spending a lot of their time being more and more creative. So I think it's our job to do the same.
No, it's good. I agree with everything you just said there. So big picture, your team figured out how to work remotely. You bounced back from what was an uncertain COVID situation, both personnel, both customers, both net new revenue, right? You are still in acquisition mode, maybe a couple of sneak through here before the end of the year. Cautiously optimistic about 2021 and beyond, constantly evaluating how to stay ahead of the technology curve. Anything else? Does that cover it? Do you have anything else on the top of your mind that you think about every day?
Just keeping and hiring and keeping great people. That's the only one I didn't hear there. But I think that's something I think a lot about, is how to make Netgain a place where people want to come to work. And I think our industry is a challenging one, but we need to continue to focus on trying to be good stewards for our employees and for their work-life balance.
And everybody go find that. What was the name of that Sam Walton book?
Made in America.
Made in America. Timely based on where we are in the world, in the calendar.
A lot of good nuggets in there.
I'm gonna go get it. Put that Amazon order in today. It was really great to kind of get into your world, understand how you see things right from your seat. Kind of get into the mode of what acquisitions look like from your side. And we really appreciate you lending us your parking lot and your people for an afternoon to kind of just get some fresh air. In an otherwise, very locked in world, I feel like we're still in some places. Can't tell you enough how much your people seem to really enjoy being, out of their houses for a few hours in the afternoon. So we hopefully will get back into your area next year, and we're hoping next year looks a little bit different, but we're watching everything just like you are. And it's nice to hear a success story, right? I mean, a lot of people have had some doom and gloom out there for a little bit this year. So it's nice every once in a while to hear that things are okay, can be better, and not everybody's in it alone.
Yeah, thank you. As my vice president of sales always says, it's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is. So I think we, like I said, are cautiously optimistic, but really appreciate the partnership and your willingness to dedicate time, energy, and resources to our folks. I do know that they did appreciate that quite a bit. So thanks a lot, George.
Awesome. For everybody who doesn't know anything about Netgain, I'm sure you can find them online at
netgainit.com.
There it is. Thanks for your time. Everybody go buy that book from Sam Walton, Make America Great, and stay safe out there, folks.
Not Make America Great, Made in America.
Uh-oh, he corrected me, but that's okay. Still good on both sides.
All
Thanks
right.
a lot. Appreciate
Bye.
you for joining.
Thanks, George.